This man's name is Greg. He was a policeman in the Special Narcotics Division. That afternoon in Marshall, Greg with his two colleagues, Antoine and Yas, failed to catch the drug dealer they were targeting. Annoyed, Greg told Antoine to call an informant named Amel to ask where the dealer was. After Amel gave the information, the three of them hurried to the location. When they arrived at the location, Antoine and Yas pretended to be buyers while Greg waited in the car. When they met the dealer and wanted to make a transaction, Yas immediately arrested the dealer, but that caused an incident with the dealer's accomplices. Fortunately, they managed to escape from their chase, though their car was badly damaged. That night, Antoine hung out with Amel. Antoine and Amel were close friends. They both agreed that every time Amel gave him information, he must give her a gift of marijuana. The next day, Greg was called to the office of his boss, Jerome. Jerome was furious because they damaged their car badly just to arrest one small dealer. If this kept happening, the police could go bankrupt. Even though they succeeded in confiscating 200 grams of marijuana, the loss was still not worth it. Jerome then advised that rather than continuing to deal with small dealers, it would be better if they focused on catching the big boss. Greg understood the situation and agreed. That afternoon, while on patrol, Yas told Antoine and Greg that his wife, Nora, was 9 months pregnant and was about to give birth. Greg and Antoine were happy to hear that. While having lunch and watching the surroundings, Greg saw a trader selling turtles, even though turtles were protected animals. To get extra bonuses, Greg invited his friends to arrest the trader. But when the trader was about to be arrested, he resisted. Yas was forced to use violence. But when they were about to take the trader to the police station, they suddenly received orders to immediately chase down a stolen car that was located not far from there. They quickly rushed and left the trader. In the middle of the chase, they were confronted by many thugs. Yas and Greg then got out of the car. Even though they were outnumbered, Greg wasn't afraid at all. But the argument started to get heated. Suddenly, the superior through the radio commanded to retreat, and whether he wanted it or not, Greg chose to retreat. Upon returning to the office, Greg was angry with Jerome. He was disappointed after receiving a retreat order while confronting criminals. Their movements were always limited. If this continued to happen, the police would be looked down upon by criminals. Jerome tried to calm him down. He understood how he felt, but as subordinates, they could only obey central orders. Maintaining peace was better than triggering a riot. Hearing that, Greg could only remain silent. The next day at the office, Nora got a call from a resident who reported a drug transaction. The characteristic of the dealer was that he was wearing a red hoodie. Nora immediately told her husband. After waiting for a long time, Yas, Greg, and Antoine were finally able to act. In the afternoon, after successfully catching the drug dealer, Yas invited Greg and Antoine to have a barbecue at his house. While waiting for meat to cook, they chatted casually discussing their work. Even though they weren't highly paid for their job, they were grateful that they could support their family. In the evening, while having fun chatting, Nora's water suddenly broke. Everyone panicked and rushed to take her to the hospital. A few days later, Greg, Antoine, and Yas were partying at the club to celebrate the birth of Yas's first child. A week later, because the business competition was getting tougher, some drug dealers uploaded videos of them beating the competitors on the internet. They arrested each other and threatened to fight over their business territory. The afternoon after the video of the drug dealers went viral, Jerome called Greg and told him that the community was increasingly restless. Residents demanded that the police eradicate the drug lords as soon as possible. Jerome asked Greg not to hesitate. If they succeeded in eradicating the dealers to their roots, the image of the police in the city would automatically improve. The next morning, Greg, Yas, and Antoine left for the port to meet Amel. Because Amel only wanted to talk to Antoine, Greg and Yas had to in the car. Antoine then started digging for deeper information about the movement of drug lords, their transactions, and the boss. Amel refused. The drug dealers became more aggressive each day. Almost every day they killed each other. She was afraid that if she was found out as an informant, it would risk her life. Upon hearing that, Antoine promised to keep it a secret and guarantee her safety. At first, Amel was still hesitant, but after continued convincing, she finally agreed, but on the condition that Antoine had to give her 5 kilos of marijuana. Antoine agreed. In the afternoon, Greg, Yas, and Antoine faced Jerome and conveyed Amel's requirements. Unfortunately, Jerome couldn't give that much marijuana. If they were found out, it could be a problem. Like it or not, the three of them had to look for marijuana without Jerome's help. In the evening, in order to collect 5 kilos of marijuana, they started raiding buyers who had just left the drug dealer's area. The next day, when the three of them were on patrol, they accidentally saw a kid about to steal a car. That night, when Greg, Yas, and Antoine wanted to raid marijuana buyers, suddenly, a group of thugs confronted them. They were angry and threatened to teach Greg and the others a lesson if they continued to disturb their business. The next day, during a meeting in the office, Jerome informed that so the mission of eradicating drug dealers could be completed more quickly, Greg would be assisted by a joint team. A few days passed. After successfully collecting 5 kilos of marijuana, Greg, Yas, and Antoine met Amel in the port. Amel immediately revealed all the information she had found. 3 days later, at dawn, Greg and the joint team were ready in their respective positions and surrounded an apartment. Antoine disguised himself as a drug buyer, while Yas was watching on the roof of the building near the apartment. Amid the silence, suddenly a yellow car pulled in. Yas immediately told Greg about it. Hearing that, Greg started the raid. Initially, the plan went smoothly, but when Antoine wanted to approach the target, one of the thugs recognized his face and alarmed the dealer. Because he was confronted by many thugs, Antoine lost track of the target. Luckily, when he was cornered, backup arrived. On the other hand, Yas, who saw the target passing in front of him, rushed to chase him and entered the apartment building. After following him to the 5th floor, Yas told the entire team his location, but when Greg wanted to catch up, the thugs blocked access to the building and Yas was trapped inside alone. Luckily, Yas managed to hide in one of the residence places before the thugs found him, while downstairs, Greg tried to find another way in. Because the resident thought Yas was a bad guy, the boy who lived in the apartment took a knife and stabbed him in the back, leaving Yas injured. Not long afterward, Greg and Antoine came to rescue him. With an injured condition, Yas showed them where the drug lord was hiding. After knocking out the drug lord's men, Greg told Yas to stand guard at the door while he and Antoine continued searching. Meanwhile, outside of the apartment, the other police managed to get in and then followed Greg. After searching the apartment, Greg finally found the location where the drug lord was hiding. He raided the place and managed to catch the drug lord. The mission was successful without any casualties. At the headquarters, Jerome praised Yas, who had played an important role in the success of the mission. To celebrate their success, Jerome invited everyone to a party. That evening, Antoine met Amel at the port. As promised, he brought the marijuana she requested. Before parting, he hugged and thanked Amel for her help so far. Amel then said goodbye. 2 months later, when they were on holiday from work, Greg, Yas, and Antoine were shocked when the police suddenly came to arrest them because they were found hoarding 5 kilos of marijuana. They were also accused of being part of a drug trafficking syndicate. At the police station, the 3 of them were interrogated in turn. During the interrogation, even though they had tried to explain that the marijuana they had collected was to buy information from an informant, the officers didn't believe them because Antoine kept his informant's name a secret. The investigation finally declared the 3 of them guilty. Greg, who didn't accept it, was angry. Even though he and his team had risked their lives to eradicate the drug dealers, they were framed as one of them. Because Greg couldn't control his emotions, he was detained. The next day, Greg asked the officers to bring in Jerome to testify for him. He was sure that Jerome could prove that they were innocent, but when asked for information, Jerome said that he was not involved in Greg's plan at all. Greg was shocked to hear that Jerome defended himself and betrayed him. Greg could only accept his sentence. After officially becoming a suspect, Yas, Antoine, and Greg were imprisoned separately. They were not allowed to communicate or meet each other. The next day, while watching TV, Yas was shocked to see the news of his arrest becoming a trending topic on the news. The 3 of them were accused of extortion and being the masterminds behind drug trafficking. Behind bars, they could only hold the hurt. A few days passed. When Antoine's lawyer came, he explained Antoine's current position in the eyes of the law. The only way to defend himself was to reveal the name of his informant. Antoine was in a dilemma. On one hand, he couldn't bear it if his colleagues had to suffer. But on the other hand, he also couldn't betray Amel. The next day, because he was too depressed, Greg went berserk. The guards were forced to drag him to the isolation room. On the other hand, fellow police officers were seen visiting Nora's house. They gave money from all the officers to help support Nora while Yas was in prison. Nora refused the aid. What she needed was the testimony from all of them to help free her husband. Everyone was involved in this case, but somehow her husband became the scapegoat. Hearing that, Yas's colleagues apologized for not being able to help because they were afraid of being dragged into this case and going to prison. In fact, Jerome was also forced to keep his mouth shut to protect his fellow police officers. Seeing their cowardly attitude, Nora was very disappointed. Day after day passed in confinement. Due to severe depression, Greg's mental state continued to decline. That morning, when Yas and Greg met, Yas was shocked to see Greg's poor condition. And because he couldn't take it anymore, Yas begged the warden to let him get a haircut with Antoine. Luckily, the guard allowed him. In a special room, when they were about to get their hair cut, Yas vented his anger to Antoine. He was disappointed with Antoine, who would rather defend Amel than his colleagues. Greg suffered mental health, and it was all thanks to him. He asked Antoine to reveal the truth. In his cell, Antoine kept thinking about Yass's words until finally he decided to say his colleagues. A few days later, after Antoine told his lawyer about the name of the informant who asked for 5 kilos of marijuana, the police arrested Amel. Antoine was then called to make sure the police didn't arrest wrongly. When he saw Amel in handcuffs, he could only cry while continuing to apologize for breaking his promise. A week later, Greg, Yass, and Antoine were finally released.